So I've stumbled upon this thought, and it is between negative and positive, right? And as it relates to music. And I had a lot of thoughts on this because I thought about it for a little bit. And after I show you the correlations in it, you will be able to come up with your own ideas of how it correlates, right? And there were so many ideas I had that I'm not going to remember all of them right now. So I'm going to just do the ones I remember, the basics of it. So let's get into it. Let's first start with negativity and positivity as they are defined. So negativity, what do we correlate to negativity? First, darkness, right? We correlate darkness to negativity. We correlate the color black to negativity. We correlate being low, like, the lower level, to negativity, right? We correlate depression to negativity, sadness to depression, right? See, I can't remember all that, but there's so many of them. I had a lot of them that correlate to negativity. Right? I can't remember all of them, but just leave it there, right? So let's go to positive. What do we consider positive? We consider the light to be positive, right? What is high is considered to be positive, right? Feeling happy is positive, right? The color white is associated with being positive, right? And again, it can go on, right? Where we correlate to those things, right? So let's go to music. Okay. Oh, before we get to music, let's talk about the levels of negativity and positivity, right? So the highest level that we may correlate to positivity is the brightest light, right? The happiest feelings and the highest altitudes we can go to. We reach for the stars, right? We consider positive, right? So now let's go to negativity on the same subject, go a little bit deeper. It's another good idea for the negativity, right? Subterranean, right? Subterranean, underground is negative, right? Being stuck at the lower levels is negative, right? That's why we reach high for the stars, right? Can't remember what all I had to wrap into that, but let's go to music. Keep in mind the sub. So, in music, back in the day when they didn't have the technology to capture such low vibrations as they do today, back in the day, they could not capture bass, right? They could not demonstrate to people what bass sounded like back in the day, except for with thunder or earthquakes, right? Or, like bass, that's it. Like thunder and earthquakes were the only things back in the day that could capture the bass and the sub vibrations, right? Back in the day. And that was rare, right? They couldn't always do that. So, but the only thing they could duplicate with their strings when they was playing guitar and harp and whatnot, they could only duplicate the lower mid-range up to the higher ends, right? From the low mid-range to the high-end range. As far as music went, that's all they could duplicate. But in today's world, we can capture that bass. We can capture the sub even, because the sub is lower than the bass, right? The bass is the lowest end of the low end, right? But the sub is even lower. The subwoofer. You know the difference. You know the difference if you fucking love music and you rock that shit. When you can get you a good sound system, you want to have that sub in there, right? The sub is necessary when you are listening to the music. And back in the 80s, because I was born in 81, right? So in the 80s when I was a kid, my relatives, my dad, my mom, maybe they had They didn't even have like good bass speakers, right? They had like house speakers. And house speakers, they could capture some good bass, but not as good as the bass they capture today. But now today there's even a differentiation between bass and sub, right? There's even a distinction between the two of them. Because depending on the device or apparatus you're listening to the music on, you will be able to capture the various levels of the music, right? For instance, the cell phone, if you listen on the cell phone, you're not going to capture the low end of the music. You're definitely not going to capture the sub. It's physically impossible to capture the sub on the cell phone. Now with certain headphones, you can capture a certain amount of the sub. You can capture a high amount of the bass, and you definitely capture the mids and the highs, right? It just depends on your sound system, right? So I'm going to tie this into negativity and positivity. So thinking of music and negativity and positivity. So let's go with the kick and the bass, right? The kick and the bass are on the low end of the music, right? The vocal, right? The vocal is generally accepted as going in the middle, right? And the hi-hats are going on the high end, right? The hi-hats are going on the high end. And the melody. So I've been thinking about it. Where does the melody go? Because the only logical explanation is that the melody goes in the middle, right? But the voice goes in the middle. So, to capture the best sound, you have to create a separation, right? To create a well mix. Because your sub, your kick, the bass, they're going on the low end. Your hi-hats are on the high end. The melody, where does that go? In the middle. That's the only place left for it, right? But the voice goes in the middle, right? That's what's accepted. So you got to pick which one is going in the. So in the middle range, you have a high mid and a low mid, right? So it's up to you to decide if the voice goes on the low mid or the high mid, and vice versa for the melody. So the melody should either go on the high mid or the low mid, depending on where the voice goes, because you want to create a harmony in the whole composition. So now let's break it down to negativity, positivity. This is where it gets interesting. Because what is the most noticeable in the music is the high end, right? The high end is the most easiest heard. And if it's too high, it'll hurt your ears, right? It'll fucking hurt your ears if it's too high. So the high end is the most receivable to the ear, the high end. It's the easiest to receive into the ear is the high end, right? The positive, right? Because we correlate positivity to being high, to being in the light, right? What is in the light is positive. So the high end of the music is the most noticeable. It's the most in the light, right? So then we're going to skip the mid. We're going to skip the mid for now. We're going to go back. We're going to go to the low, right? So we go to the low end. And again, the devices that capture the sub bass, because sub bass is different than bass. It's different because a lot of devices can capture some bass, right? But only specific devices can capture sub bass. They correlate very well. So listen. So we're on the low end of the music, right? So What goes on the low end of the music? There's really only a couple things that go on the low end of the music. Now, as you get into music theory, you want to develop a well-rounded harmony, and you want a lot of things to capture the low end, right? But let's not go that deep with that part of it. We're talking about negativity and positivity. So let's go to this part. So on the low end of the music, you got your kick, right? The kick. Now, back in the day, the kick was the lowest end you could go to, right? When in the 60s, 50s, when they was doing their music, the kick, when they was on the drum and they was hitting that the fucking kick drum, that was the lowest end they could capture. Since then, we've been able to capture deeper depths of bass, right? So as we get into the 80s, when I was born, we were able to capture bass, right? Not quite sub, bass. We were able to capture the bass. So think about it. Bass, basement, bass and basement. They relate to each other. The basement is the lower ground. Bass is the lower ground, right? So when I was born in the 80s, we were able to get the bass. We got the bass, the basement, right, of music. But as we got into the 2000s, we were able to capture lower depths to the subterranean, right? Subterranean. But fast forward, because in the early 2000s, we were getting good sub bass. We were getting the good sub, right? But today, it's even getting more in depth as to how much sub bass we can capture in the music today. Like, they're creating devices that can capture that music better today, right? Because like the sub, for instance, the sub is more felt than it is heard, right? You feel the sub more than you hear it, okay? Now, they've created devices, speakers, amps, and whatnot that can create the sub noise so you can hear it in your ears better. So they're able to mimic the feeling of the sub. They're able to mimic it in sound better today. But even still, as they can mimic it good today, still the sub is more felt than it is heard, right? It's more felt than it is heard. So now let's get back to negativity, positivity, baby. In music, the high end is the most easily heard. The quote unquote positive end of the music is easily heard. As we're relating to negative and positivity, light and dark, the high end is the lightest part, right? It's the lightest part of the music. Then you get to the mid part. The mid part of the music is the balance, right? The mid part is what brings the high and low end together to create a harmony, right? The mid does that. It's important to remember this part again, because I might forget. So the mid part is the creation of the balance, right? And where does the voice go in music? It goes in the middle. Why? Because the voice is what creates the balance and the harmony between the low and the high end, the negative and the positive end, the light and the dark end, right? The voice creates that balance, okay? As well as the melody. Now it's up to you to consider what sounds better in the mid-range, in the lower end or the higher end of the mid-range, the voice or the melody. It could be flip-flop either way, depending on the particular like or the particular voice, right? So the low end is important. Consider the low end. And it relates to today, because why today? Because today we are coming into more understanding of the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is the sub bass in the music. I'm gonna tie it up a little better, but let's leave that there. So the voice harmonizes the high and the low end, right? It puts it into perspective. The voice is key to the music, because the voice is the equalizer. The voice puts the low and high, the negative and positive, into a harmonic perspective. So on the low end, you got your bass, and on the lowest end, you have your subconscious. Think about it. The subconscious is not so easily accessed. It's hard to access your subconscious, just as well as it's hard to capture the sub in the music, the subwoofer, that low end of the music that is so fucking low that you only feel it. You only can feel it. You really can't hear it as well as you can feel it, right? Now, of course, like I said, they have created devices to capture and mimic the feeling of the sub into the sound, right? So now you can hear the sub a little better today. But it relates to now, because we hear our subconscious better today, right? We're evolving more. So we're able to hear our subconscious better today. Back in the day, you couldn't hear your subconscious back in the day. And I don't know that for a fact. I'm just going off of the texts and the history books and psychology and whatnot, right? I'm just trying to tie this up and sum it up into a harmony and a relation, right? Everything's related, right? So the subwoofer is the subconscious. So everybody wants to feel good, right? Everybody wants to feel good, which is positive, right? Everybody wants to reach for the light and reach to the greatest height they can reach, which is positive, right? And everybody, now I shouldn't say everybody, because as I said, we're developing more, but generally, right? Generalization, we don't like to dig into our subconscious. The ugliness, the darkness, the bad feelings, we don't like to bring those up. We don't like to bring them up. We want to forget those things, right? So, but this is how it relates to the music and the evolution. Because again, it wasn't but 40, 50 years ago, they didn't even, in music, they weren't even able to capture the sub sound. They weren't even able to capture that. And they were barely touching on the bass, barely, right? But today, we can get deep. And if you love music and you appreciate all the frequencies and all the ends of the ceiling from the high to the low, and when you're in a car, people that have car systems know this. You got your subs in the back and your amps that are able to capture that fucking low sub that goes so fucking low that you feel your heart going dum 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 dum. You feel that shit. You love that shit. Right? But that's a new thing. They didn't have that in the 70s and the 80s, that low sub, which is the subconscious mind. The darkest part of you is that, right? And this is how I correlate it, because the sub, right, it's more felt than it is heard, right? So it's more of a feeling than a physical thing, right? Right? And so you can say that for light and darkness and positivity and negativity, right? Because the positivity is the thing that is the most we're drawn to. We see that more, right? We see it more. But the negative darkness, we haven't been as in touch with that. So it's not like you can see it as well, right? But you can feel it, right? It's a feeling. It's a feeling of darkness, of gloom, of doom, of boom. The bass, the sub, boom. It's the feeling, right? It ties in, right? How it ties in, man? Negativity, positivity, music, the high end, the low ends. I know I'm onto something. Now y'all can go ahead and spin that idea and add to it and create more to what I just described, because I had a lot of ideas on it and I didn't even touch on all of them. But you can add to it, or in the idea of open discussion, you can refute it. You can discuss the things that basically oppose the idea I just demonstrated. This is just an idea because I don't know shit. I don't know fucking nothing. It's just an idea. So we create an open discussion. Boom, boom. The sub, baby. The subwoofer, the subconscious.